Some spaces hum with quiet history, rooms built not just with walls and chairs, but with years of tradition, expectation, and unspoken rules. The pilot's executive lounge at Westward Terminal was one of those spaces. It was filled with framed black and white photos of aviation pioneers, mahogany furniture polished to a mirror sheen, and a silence that clung like velvet. Everything inside whispered a single word: legacy. Elijah Monroe Walker stood just inside the door, holding a neatly folded letter from the Horizon Aviation Future Leaders Program and an identification badge that still smelled like freshly printed plastic. He didn't sit right away. His fingers ran along the edges of the badge, the Horizon logo glinting faintly beneath the lights. For months he had dreamed of this moment, his first step inside a real pilot's lounge, not as a guest of someone else, but as a participant, as someone who belonged. At 16, Elijah carried himself with the quiet maturity of someone who had learned early not to take up too much space. He had worn his best gray blazer and pressed black slacks, a blue dress shirt buttoned to the collar. His sneakers were spotless. His hair was trimmed just the way his father, Preston Walker, liked, short on the sides, clean at the neckline. He approached the nearest leather chair and sat, carefully placing his duffel bag on the floor. Across the room, a Model 787 Dreamliner rested in a glass case. Elijah's eyes flicked toward it, admiration blooming silently. He had memorized the aircraft's specs, studied its fuel system, its wingspan, even the flight path it was best optimized for. He could explain it better than most people his age could explain their own social media profiles. But in the stillness of that lounge, none of that mattered. Behind him, the heavy door creaked open. Captain Susan Halberg entered, her footsteps as precise and polished as her uniform. Tall, in her mid-50s, with platinum blonde hair tied into a no-nonsense bun and a face set in permanent authority, Halberg was one of the airline's most senior captains. She had seen more sky than most people had seen land, and she prided herself on knowing every face in her domain. She stopped mid-step when her gaze landed on Elijah. Her eyebrows arched slightly at first, then knit together like storm clouds gathering. "Excuse me," she said sharply. "Who let you in here?" Elijah rose quickly, startled by the tone. "Ma'am, I'm Elijah Walker. I was accepted into the Future Leaders Program. Ms. Angela Kim from HR gave me clearance this morning." He held up his badge, a hopeful gesture, small but earnest. Halberg didn't even glance at it. "You were accepted?" she echoed, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Into this room?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm scheduled for the 10 a.m. orientation tour with the pilot mentors. I got here early because," he paused and swallowing, "because I really wanted to see this place." Halberg took 3 strides toward him. Her boots clicked sharply on the tile, louder than necessary in the reverent silence. "This is a secure lounge, not a field trip," she said icily. "You don't just walk in here and gawk at the decor." "I wasn't," Elijah began, but she raised a hand to silence him. Her eyes swept over his clothes, his skin, the way his hands gripped the strap of his duffel bag. In that single measuring look, years of preparation collapsed into invisibility. To her, he wasn't a scholar, a dreamer, or even a guest. He was a question mark. And worse, he was a threat. Without warning, Halberg reached out and snatched the badge from Elijah's chest. The strap snapped, the plastic falling with a sharp crack to the floor. "Fake," she muttered, lifting it as if it were evidence of a crime. She tapped her radio. "Security to the pilot's lounge. Possible breach." Elijah's breath caught. "Please, please don't. Just call Ms. Kim. She'll verify." But Halberg wasn't listening. "Dark hoodie types think they can just waltz in and pretend to be part of this industry," she snapped. "Not on my watch." Her voice carried easily through the hall outside, drawing curious glances from other pilots and staff passing by. A few slowed down. 1 or 2 paused completely. Elijah felt heat rising to his cheeks, not from guilt, but from humiliation, the kind that eats away at a young man's posture, his voice, his sense of safety. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "You don't get to define wrong in here," she replied coldly. At that moment, the room was no longer a lounge. It was a courtroom, and Captain Susan Halberg had appointed herself judge and jury. Her verdict had been decided the second she saw him, and no badge, no dream, was going to change that. Outside, a pair of security officers appeared in the corridor. Halberg waved them forward like she was swatting away a nuisance. Elijah took a step back. This can't be happening, he thought. Not here. Not after everything I worked for. Let me just call my dad, he said, reaching for his phone. Halberg scoffed. I doubt your father can fix this, son. If anything, I'll make sure he hears about how you tried to infiltrate secure ground. I'm sure the HR department will be happy to hear that your family won't be welcome back. Something inside Elijah splintered. Not fear, not sadness, something deeper. The cruel unfairness of being reduced, erased, and an elitist for simply being. He dialed and hoped. Because somewhere beyond those walls, his father, the man who had taught him the principles of lift and integrity, who had walked him through the science of aerodynamics and the strength of character, wasn't just a father. Preston Walker was a man who could clear the sky. And soon, that sky was going to shift. Elijah's fingers trembled as he pressed the call button, the soft hum of the phone ringing in his ear like a lifeline stretched across a storm. The lounge, once a dream carved in marble and leather, had become an interrogation chamber, its walls now silent witnesses to suspicion dressed in protocol. Captain Susan Halberg stood tall by the door, arms folded, lips thin as paper. Her eyes never left Elijah. They followed him with the intensity of a hawk, not because she feared danger, but because she'd already decided he was one. The two security officers entered with swift, heavy steps. Both were uniformed in crisp gray, earpieces tucked behind their ears, batons hanging quietly at their belts. They were trained to assess threats, defuse tension, but they had also been called here under false pretenses. And that call was already shaping the way they looked at Elijah. That's him, Halberg snapped, pointing as if labeling an exhibit. He doesn't belong here. I need him removed immediately and his belongings searched. Ma'am, one officer said cautiously, has he shown any ID? Halberg tossed the snapped badge onto the glass table with a loud clink. Fake, she said again. The word loud and firm meant not to inform, but to convict. Probably printed it himself. He claims someone in HR gave it to him. That's what they all say. The word they lingered in the air like smoke. Elijah's voice, though small, cut through the tension. My name is Elijah Monroe Walker, he said, chest rising with each breath. I'm here for the Future Leaders Program. Ms. Angela Kim gave me this badge. I didn't forge anything. I didn't break in. Then why are you the only one in here? Halberg demanded, stepping closer. Why didn't anyone recognize you? Because no one looked at me, Elijah said quietly. The second officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. His eyes were softer, more hesitant. Do you have any form of ID, son? Elijah nodded, reaching slowly into his pocket. His fingers brushed against a folded note from his father, tucked behind his driver's permit. Just in case. He handed both over. The officer looked them over, his expression unreadable. Meanwhile, Elijah's phone kept ringing. No answer. Come on, Dad. Pick up. Halberg was already barking into her radio. I don't care what the HR log says. If they gave him access, then someone in HR needs to be reviewed too. This is a security breach. Period. The officer handed the ID back, but Elijah saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, like he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Elijah took a breath. His throat was dry, his knees heavy, but the words came anyway. You're accusing me without asking questions. You didn't give me a second to explain. You saw my face and made a decision. You're lucky I'm not calling TSA, Halberg snapped. Why? Elijah asked, voice cracking slightly. Because I'm black. The room fell into an unnatural silence. One of the pilots who had lingered just outside the lounge paused, eyes wide. The second security officer lowered his gaze. I saw the way you looked at me when you walked in, Elijah continued. You didn't see a student or a dream. You saw a problem. Halberg's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. I've been watching everything, Elijah replied, standing taller despite the heat in his chest. The way you didn't even glance at my ID, the way you shouted before asking. If this badge belonged to someone who looked different, would you have snapped it in half? Halberg's silence was louder than any rebuttal. Then, a new sound. The ping of a notification, then another, then several more. One of the pilots outside whispered, "He's live." Elijah's hands were still shaking, but the phone in his palm now displayed a glowing red icon. Live. He had hit the button right before speaking, streaming his encounter as it unfolded. His face was in frame, his voice recorded. And now, so was Captain Halberg's. Within seconds, viewers were piling in. Comments popped up like fireflies. "This is unacceptable. Where's his HR rep? He's just a kid. What is she doing?" Racism, plain and simple. Halberg looked down, realizing the camera had been rolling. Her confident stance faltered. "You can't record here," she snapped. "It's a public stream," Elijah said. "And the world should see this. They should know how I'm treated in a space where I was invited to learn." The officers exchanged glances. For the first time, doubt appeared in both their eyes. "I'm not a trespasser. I'm not a threat," Elijah said, his voice growing steadier with each word. "I'm a 16-year-old who worked hard to be here. I'm the kid who wrote a 10-page essay about aerodynamics and stayed up studying flight maps while my friends played video games." One of the younger pilots in the hallway stepped forward. "Hey," he said softly, "I think I remember seeing an email about you. Angela Kim mentioned someone from the Diversity Youth Program was touring today." Halberg spun around. "That has nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this," the pilot shot back. A moment later, another chime, then footsteps. Angela Kim burst through the hallway door, breathless, her HR badge swinging from her neck. "What the hell is going on in here?" Halberg stiffened. "He claimed you gave him access." "Because I did," Angela snapped. "Elijah Monroe Walker is a fully registered participant in our Aviation Futures initiative. I processed his clearance myself. That badge was real, and so is his right to be here." The room froze. Angela stepped beside Elijah, turning to face the gathering crowd. "I want everyone to hear this clearly," she said. "If what I saw on that live stream is accurate, then this is not just a mistake. It's an abuse of power, and I will be reporting it." Captain Halberg's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Angela turned to Elijah. "I am so sorry." Elijah nodded, breath catching, and whispered, "Thank you." And then, almost as if summoned by truth itself, the hallway filled with a new presence. Tall, commanding, in a Navy FAA uniform with gleaming silver wings on his chest. Preston Walker had arrived. The sound of his father's boots striking the tiled floor was unlike anything Elijah had heard that day. Steady, unhurried, but each step landed with the gravity of someone used to commanding rooms at 30,000 feet, and still more than capable of grounding anyone at sea level. Preston Walker was not just a father. He was a senior administrator at the Federal Aviation Administration, a decorated former pilot, and one of the key architects of Horizon Airlines' safety reform initiative. His reputation carried weight across every terminal and tower in the country, and today it entered the pilot's lounge like thunder wrapped in dignity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Elijah," he said gently, stepping through the small crowd that had now formed near the lounge entrance. "Are you hurt?" Elijah shook his head, eyes wide. "I'm okay, Dad." Preston placed one firm hand on his son's shoulder, steadying him like the hand of a captain on the yoke during turbulence. He turned next to Angela Kim, who looked relieved to see him. "I received 3 missed calls and 2 emergency texts," Preston said, his voice calm but taut with controlled fury. "From my son, and a copy of a live stream showing him being publicly accused of espionage. Would anyone here like to explain that?" Captain Susan Halberg, pale but defiant, took half a step forward. "Mr. Walker, I had no way of knowing who he was. His presence in a secure lounge, unattended and unrecognized, posed a security concern." Preston raised an eyebrow. "So you detained him, humiliated him, and accused him of forgery, without once verifying with HR, without checking his clearance status, without asking his name?" Halberg hesitated. His behavior was irregular. "Elijah?" Preston asked, not looking away from her. "What exactly did you do when you entered the room?" "I sat," Elijah said simply, his voice dry. "That's all. I sat and waited." Angela added, "He was early, as most participants in our programs are encouraged to be. He had every right to be here." Preston nodded, then shifted his gaze to the security officers. Did either of you verify his credentials before intervening? The taller one cleared his throat. No, sir. We were following the captain's orders. And those orders included seizing his badge, searching his bag, and broadcasting him as a threat in front of dozens of staff? Silence. The crowd, now thick with airline employees, pilots, and a few operations managers, shifted uncomfortably. Phones were slowly lowered, shoulders slumped. No one was laughing anymore. Preston turned back to Halberg. Do you know how many young black men make it into this program each year, Captain? She blinked, saying nothing. Not many, he continued, and fewer still manage it without sponsorship. Elijah wrote a 10-page essay, scored top percentile in his math assessment, beat out nearly 500 applicants to get that badge you tore off him without hesitation. He should have, Halberg began. He should have been respected, Preston cut in, voice firm now. He should have been welcomed. And instead, you turn this lounge into a courtroom and yourself into executioner, based on nothing more than your suspicion and his skin color. A ripple of gasps moved through the onlookers. Someone quietly muttered, That's exactly what happened. Elijah stood straighter. Dad, he said, turning to him, she said you probably clean bathrooms for a living. Preston's jaw tightened, and still he didn't yell. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Halberg until they stood eye to eye. Not as strangers, not even as professionals, but as two people standing at the crossroads of accountability. Captain Halberg, he said, measured, I've cleaned jet engines in sub-zero temperatures. I've changed hydraulic lines mid-storm on the tarmac. I've stayed up until dawn rewriting flight safety protocols. So, no, I don't clean bathrooms. But if I did, it wouldn't make your comment any less offensive, nor your assumptions any less disgraceful. Halberg's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her posture was crumbling, piece by piece. Behind her, a flat-screen television blinked on. Angela Kim, hands shaking slightly, had connected her tablet to the lounge's media system. On screen, surveillance footage from just 2 hours earlier. There was Elijah entering with Angela. Her smile was warm, her gesture inviting. She pointed to the lounge, handed him his badge, and gave him a checklist of the day's events. Then, moments later, Halberg strided into the lounge, snatching the badge off his chest and calling security. Her body language, aggressive, her face set with contempt. The room went still. A second file popped up. 3 official complaints over the past 3 years against Captain Halberg, each filed by Black or Latino crew members, citing unprovoked suspicion, targeted hostility, and inappropriate comments. Angela's voice broke the silence. I had buried those complaints because they were anecdotal. I regret that now. This one wasn't. This one was public, and it was documented. Preston looked at his son. Elijah nodded, lips pressed into a determined line. Captain Halberg, Preston said slowly, consider this your final day in this lounge. 2 security officers stepped forward, now no longer against Elijah but on his side. One gestured toward the hallway. Halberg's face flushed deep crimson. You're suspending me, she asked, voice faltering. No, Preston replied. I'm grounding you, indefinitely. Captain Susan Halberg stood frozen, her sharp posture sagging under the weight of humiliation. For the first time in her decades-long career, she found herself not at the helm, but cornered, outflanked by her own pride. The uniform that once conferred authority now looked heavy on her frame, almost ill-fitting, as if her body no longer deserved its power. The silence was thunderous as the officers flanked her on either side. Captain, one said with awkward professionalism, please come with us. Her eyes darted toward the pilots in the lounge. Some averted their gazes, others watched her with blank expressions. Not one reached out. Not one defended her. As she stepped toward the door, her polished shoes echoing across the tile, she passed Elijah. Their eyes met briefly. There was no vengeance in his, no gloating, only clarity, a quiet, unwavering truth that now lived where fear had once been. She looked away first. The doors opened with a soft hiss as she left the room, but the silence she left behind would linger far longer than her footsteps. Elijah remained still. He had spent the last 20 minutes bracing for ruin, his body preparing to be thrown out, his dignity torn down. But now, in the absence of confrontation, he didn't quite know how to move. His muscles were still tight with defense, his fingers clenched like they hadn't received the signal that the threat was gone. Angela Kim leaned over gently. Elijah, would you like to step outside with me for some water? He nodded. Preston placed a hand on his back, guiding him toward the hallway with a protective firmness that Elijah recognized from childhood. When thunder scared him, when other kids mocked him for his dreams, when teachers doubted his worth. As they stepped into the corridor, a light murmur followed. Not ridicule, applause, quiet, respectful, and unsure. The kind that grows not from spectacle, but from a reckoning shared. Elijah stopped. He turned back toward the lounge slowly. I need to say something, he said. Angela looked hesitant. You don't have to. I do. He walked back inside, his heart pounding against his rib cage like a second heartbeat. All eyes turned to him, not with suspicion now, but with attention. For once, he wasn't being examined like a threat. He was being heard. He stood near the glass case that had first caught his eye that morning, the Model 787 inside it still glinting under soft lights, elegant and unreachable. Until now. I came here because I love flying, he said, his voice clear. Not because of status, not because someone pulled strings for me, but since I was little, I've believed that the sky is the most honest place in the world. He looked around. But today I saw how even the ground can try to pull you down. Angela nodded solemnly from behind him. I sat in that lounge because I wanted to belong, and instead I was treated like I was dangerous. I was told I was lying. I was told that I looked like someone who didn't belong here. The room was still. Elijah took a breath, his voice steadier now. I've worked hard. I studied night after night. I passed every exam. I earned that badge. But the minute Captain Halberg looked at me, she didn't see any of that. She saw something else. And that's what nearly broke me. He looked down for a moment, then back up. But it didn't. He glanced at his father, standing proudly near the door. Because I had someone who taught me how to fly above other people's expectations, who told me that altitude isn't just measured in feet, it's measured in dignity. Angela stepped forward and placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. And you taught us something today, too, Elijah. Before she could continue, another voice spoke up from the crowd. A woman dressed in a dark Navy pilot's uniform stepped through the parting circle of staff. Her eyes were kind, her stride confident. Elijah Walker, she asked with a smile. He turned toward her. Yes? I'm Captain Leah Morgan. I fly the 787 Dreamliner for Horizon's international routes. I just finished my final pre-flight check, and I saw your live stream. I wanted to meet the young man who reminded an entire industry how dangerous silence can be. Elijah blinked. Thank you, ma'am. She smiled gently. No, ma'am. Call me Leah. I started just like you, dreaming in spaces I was told didn't belong to me, but I claimed them anyway. Then she nodded toward the hallway. I've got a short window before boarding. Would you like to see the cockpit before I go? Elijah's breath caught. Yes, he whispered. Leah winked. Come on, future captain. They walked through the corridor side by side. Captain Morgan, Preston, Angela, and Elijah, passing flight crews and staff who offered respectful nods and quiet apologies. The tension that once pulsed like static in the air had begun to dissipate, replaced by something warmer. When they reached the jetway, Leah tapped her badge, and the door opened to reveal the pristine interior of a Boeing 787. Elijah stepped inside and stopped. The cockpit was everything he had imagined and more. Every dial, every screen, every button. This was the language he had spent years studying, the rhythm of flight, the heart of a machine that could defy gravity. Leah gestured to the co-pilot's seat. Go ahead, she said. Feel the yoke. Elijah sat, his fingers wrapping slowly around the controls. It wasn't a simulator this time. It wasn't a video or a textbook. It was real. Leah pointed toward the horizon visible through the windshield. You see that line? Where the sky meets the unknown? Elijah nodded. That's where you belong, and today you proved it. The moment Elijah's fingers touched the yoke, something quiet and extraordinary happened. It wasn't the click of a switch or the hum of an engine. It was subtler than that, like a current passing through his hands. The weight of what had just happened, the humiliation he had endured, the rage he had swallowed, they didn't disappear. But here, in this cockpit, they became fuel. He had imagined this space for years. Now he was sitting in it, not as a visitor, not as a prop, but as someone who belonged. Captain Leah Morgan sat beside him, watching without saying a word. She didn't need to. She had seen this moment before, in herself. The first time she sat behind the controls and felt that blend of awe, fear, and quiet certainty. She let the silence stretch, honoring it. Finally, she said, "You know, the first time I sat here, someone told me I looked too young to carry responsibility. The second time, someone said I didn't look like a captain. The third time, they said I didn't sound like one." Elijah turned, surprised. She smiled, wry and soft. "They stopped saying those things when I landed in a monsoon with 219 passengers and a crosswind that could have snapped the tail clean off." He grinned, the first real one in hours. Leah nodded toward the altimeter. "Flying isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right, over and over again." Elijah nodded slowly. "Can I tell other kids about this? The cockpit, the program, the way you made space for me today?" Leah's voice was warm. "Tell everyone." By the time Elijah and his father left the airport, his live stream had already been clipped and shared across multiple platforms. The video, raw, steady, and utterly human, captured hearts as swiftly as it captured views. 9,000 views, then 50,000, then 300,000. By nightfall, his name was trending on social media under the hashtag #LetHimFly. The video had it all: the confrontation, the dignity, the silence of the crowd, and the emergence of truth. No raised fists, no shouting, just a 16-year-old boy using his voice. And the moment his father stepped through the door to protect not just his son, but the future he represented. News outlets reached out, local stations first, then national. Elijah declined most interviews. He didn't want to be a symbol, he just wanted to breathe, to process. But the world had already begun rewriting him, from a quiet dreamer in a borrowed lounge chair to a symbol of something bigger. Preston watched his son carefully that night. They sat side by side on the living room couch, the house dim except for the soft glow of the television. A news anchor recounted the day's events in a careful voice, paired with clips from the live stream and a statement from Horizon Airlines. "We are deeply sorry for the events that transpired in our pilot lounge today. We recognize that Captain Halberg's conduct was unacceptable and inconsistent with our values of inclusion and integrity. She has been suspended pending a full internal investigation. We will not allow prejudice to go unaddressed in our company." Preston's phone buzzed. Again, Elijah stared straight ahead. "You okay?" Preston asked, voice low. Elijah nodded, then shook his head. "It's strange. I worked so hard to get in that lounge. But no one remembers that part. They only remember what happened after." "That's because what happened after revealed the truth," Preston said gently. "And sometimes, standing up is the achievement." "I didn't want to stand up," Elijah murmured. "I just wanted to sit down like everyone else." Preston reached over and clasped his son's hand. "You did sit down. And when they tried to take that from you, you didn't get up quietly. That's what matters." The next morning, a message arrived from Horizon Airlines' CEO requesting a private call with Elijah and Preston. Angela Kim, who had now been temporarily elevated to oversee the airline's inclusion review team, joined as well. The CEO's tone was direct but respectful. He thanked Elijah for his courage, apologized again, and invited him to serve as a youth inclusion advisor for Horizon's newly forming diversity board. They wanted real reform, and they wanted him at the table. Elijah didn't answer right away. He looked to his father. Preston nodded, but with caution in his eyes. "Only if it's something you want, son. Don't let this become another spotlight that drains you." Elijah turned back to the screen. "I'll do it," he said, "but only if this isn't just a press release. I want a real program. I want other kids to know this path exists and that it belongs to them too." The CEO nodded. "We'll build it." Angela smiled with pride. Over the next few weeks, Elijah's story rippled outward. He spoke briefly at a local aviation youth event, sharing not just his trauma, but his dream. He talked about how he used to tape pictures of cockpit dashboards above his bed, how his father taught him to read wind speeds like other kids read comic books. He once fixed an old flight sim joystick using duct tape and YouTube tutorials. Kids listened, some cried, others asked for book recommendations. One girl about 10 said, "I didn't know I could do that too." That night, Elijah sat alone with his thoughts and realized something. His dream hadn't been derailed. It had just been rerouted. Like a flight avoiding turbulence, it was still going forward, just differently. Back at Horizons HQ, Angela Kim rolled out a full review of crew conduct standards. Preston collaborated directly with FAA officials and Horizons board to draft a new training program titled Clear Skies, Clear Minds, Equity in the Air. It included bias response training, youth mentorship integration, real-time accountability channels, pilot lounge surveillance transparency. It also included Elijah's live stream, preserved and used as a learning tool. When he found out, Elijah's only request was simple. Don't use my face without using my name. And don't forget why I was there in the first place. Not to fight, just to fly. 3 weeks after the incident, the halls of Horizon Airlines headquarters gleamed with forced calm. Polished floors, crisp uniforms, nods that felt slightly too long, smiles just a bit too wide. On the surface, it appeared as though the company had absorbed the shock, made its peace, and moved forward. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. It started with a single email. Subject line, "You should hear this." No body text, just an attachment. Angela Kim sat at her desk when she received it. Her heart panged as she recognized the anonymous sender ID used for internal whistleblower alerts, a system Preston himself had helped implement 5 years ago during a safety reform initiative. She clicked play. The audio crackled to life. The first 10 seconds were garbled. Footsteps, distant chatter, the clink of a mug. Then came the voice. "I don't care what color the badge says. You see a kid like that alone in the lounge? You pull them out. Fast." It was unmistakably Captain Susan Halberg. Cold, condescending, confident, recorded sometime before the incident, during a pilot debrief over coffee in the break room. Another voice, unidentified, laughed lightly. "Bit much, don't you think?" Halberg replied, her voice sharper now. "Look, I don't make the rules. I just know who doesn't belong in that space. That's how you stay ahead of threats, the uniformed ones and the silent ones." Angela's blood turned to ice. She replayed it 3 times. There was no misinterpretation, no ambiguity. It was an admission. Worse, a pattern. Not a moment of fear, but a mindset of bias. And now, thanks to the internal whistleblower, it had come to light. She stood immediately, her hands shaking slightly, and called Preston. An emergency meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Elijah arrived with his father, and both of them were ushered into the boardroom on the 27th floor. Executives lined one side of the table, legal counsel on the other. A screen flickered silently at the front, showing a waveform paused mid-sentence. Angela greeted them with tired eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly to Elijah, "but I need you to hear this before it leaks." The audio played. Elijah didn't move. He didn't blink. But his jaw clenched and his chest barely rose as he listened to his dignity dissected like a security threat. Again. Preston sat beside him, stone still. When the clip ended, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then Elijah spoke. "I thought she was just afraid of me," he said, his voice low. "But this wasn't fear. This was policy. Her own, maybe, but policy." The CEO turned toward Angela. "Do we know who recorded it?" Angela shook her head. "No, the sender's anonymous, but it's likely a pilot, possibly someone who wanted to speak up but didn't know how." The legal counsel interjected. "If this leaks, we're not just looking at bad PR. We're looking at civil liability, class action implications, and potential FAA scrutiny for fostering a discriminatory environment." Elijah didn't flinch. "You should be scrutinized." Everyone turned. "I'm not trying to be cruel," he said calmly, "but if one person said it, others probably thought it. This isn't about saving face. It's about doing the work. For real this time." The CEO leaned forward. What do you propose, Elijah? He looked down at his hands for a moment. They were steady now, not like that day in the lounge. I want this played at every training session in your new program. I want people to hear what bias sounds like when it thinks no one's listening. Preston looked at his son, proud but silent. I want crew members to write their reflections afterward, not some corporate worksheet, something real, something human. And I want the training renamed. The CEO raised an eyebrow. Renamed to what? Elijah looked up. See me. SEE. Stand, examine, empathize, he continued. Because if someone had just seen me that day, really seen me, none of this would have happened. Silence. Then Angela softly said, That's beautiful. The CEO nodded slowly. We'll make it happen. All of it. The leaked audio hit the press 4 days later, and the world again took notice. Social media reignited, not with outrage this time, but with clarity. This wasn't just a mistake. It was systemic. It was embedded. And now it was exposed. Journalists ran front-page headlines. Captain's bias caught on tape. Industry faces reckoning. See Me training goes national after youth's stand shakes aviation sector. Elijah's face appeared once again on screens across the country, but this time, the image was different. He stood beside Captain Leah Morgan in the cockpit, both smiling, holding a folder with the new See Me curriculum inside. No longer a victim, no longer a footnote, a catalyst. Back home, Elijah returned to his life with cautious hope. He still had classes, still had homework, but now he also had invitations from schools, youth organizations, and even a few law students asking if he would consider public service one day. He always answered the same. I just want to fly. But one afternoon, sitting with Captain Leah Morgan after a flight simulator session, he admitted something else. I think I also want to help build the runway, he said. She smiled. Then start by walking it. It began with a letter, a real, thick, cream-colored paper, folded precisely and sealed with a faintly gold-stamped crest, the emblem of the National Association of Black Aviators. Elijah found it waiting on the kitchen counter one rainy afternoon, wedged between junk mail and a scholarship flyer. He almost missed it, but when he opened it, the scent of paper and ink filled the room, a strangely grounding presence in his digital world. Dear Elijah Walker, you don't know me, but I've been watching. Your name echoes in rooms I once fought to enter. You stood where I stood, decades apart, and you spoke what I once swallowed. Thank you. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. Silas R. Green Captain, retired. Horizon Airlines, class of '79. Preston was already pouring coffee when Elijah handed the letter to him, his eyes wide. Preston read it twice. His expression shifted from curiosity to reverence. I've heard of him, he murmured. Silas Green was one of the first black commercial airline pilots in the country. Horizon wouldn't admit that publicly, but every black flyer knows his name. Elijah blinked. I've never seen him in any of the company histories. That's because history only tells the parts that make people comfortable. Preston set the letter down gently. If he wants to meet you, you say yes. They met 3 days later in a quiet hangar outside Atlanta. It was barely lit, an old maintenance facility decommissioned years ago and now used as storage for aircraft training relics. Inside, time seemed to pause. Vintage cockpit shells lined the walls, and photographs, many of them in black and white, hung from corkboards like forgotten medals. Silas Green was already seated when Elijah entered. A tall, lean man with silver hair that framed his temples like laurels and eyes sharp as twin runway beacons. He wore a simple bomber jacket, a horizon pin still gleaming above his heart. You must be Elijah, he said, rising slowly. Yes, sir, Elijah replied, reaching out. Silas shook his hand firmly. No, sir. Call me Silas. Titles come and go. What matters is who you carry with you when you walk through that door. Elijah smiled. They sat across from each other at a rusted briefing table. For a moment they just sat, pilot and protege, decades apart but bound by something deeper than experience. You know, Silas began, back in '79 I had to sleep in my car outside this very hangar because the local hotel wouldn't rent a room to a black man in uniform. I flew a 737 cross-country the next morning on 3 hours of sleep and a stomach full of gas station peanuts. Elijah's eyes widened. No complaints, Silas added. I didn't fly for comfort. I flew to make the sky familiar. To prove I could, he paused, and sometimes to survive. Elijah looked around the room. They don't mention you in Horizon's materials. Silas laughed once, dry and knowing. Of course they don't. They erased what didn't fit. A black man pushing back against flight crew bias in the 80s? That's not a brochure story. But it should be, Elijah said. Silas nodded, then leaned forward. I saw your live stream, son. I saw how you stood. You weren't just brave. You were clear. That's harder. That takes something generational. Elijah felt something stir inside, like a compass needle locking into place. Silas continued, voice softer now. I kept a journal during my time in the skies. Notes, incidents, names. Times when I was denied, mocked, and silenced. I wasn't bitter. I just believed that someday someone would need the record. He reached into his coat and handed Elijah a small leather-bound notebook. Its pages were weathered, edges soft like the corners of a well-loved map. Maybe it's you. Elijah took the journal carefully, feeling its weight. It wasn't just a book, it was a legacy. That night, Elijah stayed up reading. Each entry painted a stark picture of what Silas endured. Delays with no explanations, cabin crew that refused his orders, and supervisors who questioned his qualifications at every turn. But amid the struggle were also moments of pride. His first landing in a thunderstorm, a thank you note from a nervous passenger, a photo of his daughter waving from the gate. By morning, Elijah had filled 2 pages of his own notes. He brought them to Angela Kim the next day. I think we need to expand the program, he said. Angela, already buried in revisions to CME's Phase 2 training model, looked up. Go on. Silas Green exists, Elijah said, and no one knows. How many others like him are missing from your training slides? How many legacies are left out because they don't fit the image Horizon wants to project? Angela leaned back, thoughtful. What are you proposing? A living archive, Elijah replied. Stories, records, interviews. We build a curriculum, not just on how to avoid BIA, but on the lives that were shaped despite it. Every new trainee learns not only the policy, but the people. Angela's eyes softened. You want to make sure the next Elijah doesn't have to fight so hard? No, Elijah said. I want to make sure the next Silas is remembered. 2 weeks later, Elijah and Silas stood together on stage at the unveiling of the Flight Lines Archive Project, a digital and physical repository of testimonies from underrepresented pilots, flight attendants, and ground crew across Horizon's 70-year history. Beside them, Captain Leah Morgan stood proudly, her voice steady as she read aloud the project's new mission. To fly forward, we must look back. To remember is not to dwell, but to honor the winds that carried us here. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Elijah stepped forward to speak last. He held up Silas' journal, his voice clear. Every system leaves someone out, but when those stories are brought to light, not with rage, but with purpose, we all learn to see again, not just passengers, people. It was supposed to be a celebration. The annual Pilot Coalition Forum, a prestigious invitation-only summit held each year in Washington, D.C., was where the most senior commercial pilots, aviation executives, and training officials gathered to honor industry milestones and shape future flight standards. For the first time, they had extended an invitation to a youth advocate, Elijah Monroe Walker. He was scheduled to speak on the second day during a segment titled The Skies Ahead, Diversity, Safety, and the Future of Flight. His inclusion had made headlines. It marked the first time in the forum's 42-year history that a non-licensed teenager would address the industry's top ranks. Elijah prepared carefully. He rehearsed his speech late into the night, seeking a tone that was respectful but unflinching. He didn't want to scold the audience. He wanted to invite them into something better. He didn't expect the blowback to arrive before he even touched the podium. The morning of the forum, Elijah stepped onto the stage early to check the microphone. The grand ballroom was still filling with attendees, men and women in navy blazers, adorned with silver and gold wings on their lapels. The air smelled faintly of coffee and conservative tradition. From the side of the stage, Preston watched with quiet pride. Then came the whisper. Not from the crowd, but from the side aisle, loud enough to carry, soft enough to pretend it wasn't meant to be heard. What's next? Letting interns run the cockpits? Several pilots near the center row chuckled. Elijah didn't flinch. He had trained for this moment, not with flashcards or flight simulators, but with resilience. He stepped forward, waited for the murmurs to die, and began. Good morning. My name is Elijah Monroe Walker. I'm 16. I don't have a pilot's license. I haven't logged flight hours. But I know turbulence. He paused. Not just the kind that shakes the wings, but the kind that shakes your identity. I know what it means to walk into a room designed without you in mind. And I know what it means to stay anyway. A few heads nodded. He held up the leather-bound journal Silas Green had given him. This is the flight log of Captain Silas R. Green, one of Horizon Airlines' first black pilots. For decades, his name was buried. His records were stored but never spoken of. Why? Because they challenged the comfort of the narrative. Elijah looked out at the crowd. I'm not here to accuse. I'm here to invite. Because if the sky belongs to everyone, our lounges, our cockpits, our decision tables must too. Applause began, scattered, then growing, until it was cut short. A man stood near the back. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, silver epaulets gleaming, Captain Alan Trask, a 30-year veteran of NorthJet Airways and former chair of the National Pilots Council. His voice boomed without microphone assistance. Let me get this straight, he said. You're telling that after decades of safe flying, you, a teenager with no hours logged, should be influencing how we train? The room tensed. The applause died. Elijah didn't retreat. I'm not here because I'm an expert in flight, he said calmly. I'm here because I've seen what bias on the ground can do to the air above. I'm here because I was accused, not because I was wrong, but because I didn't fit the image of who should be there. Trask crossed his arms. And you think broadcasting one bad apple justifies overhauling an entire system? It's not one apple, Elijah said. It's a culture that lets apples rot quietly until one of them bruises a child in a lounge and no one blinks. Gas flickered across the room. A few pilots murmured. Some stared at Trask. Elijah stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his voice rising, not in anger but in conviction. Captain Trask, I respect your flight hours, your record, your service. But with all due respect, if your pride is shaken by the presence of a student at the table, then maybe it's time to check your altitude. The room erupted, not into chaos, but into thunderous applause. It was a defining moment. Even some of Trask's longtime supporters clapped. Captain Leah Morgan rose from her chair in the third row. I flew in Vietnam. I logged 18,000 hours commercial. And that young man just said more about leadership in 5 minutes than most of us do in 5 years. Elijah's eyes met hers, gratitude flashing. After the session, the crowd gathered in the foyer. Conversations buzzed. Reporters hovered discreetly, their cameras now capturing not just a speech, but a turning point. Trask stood quietly in a corner, jaw set. Preston approached him. Captain, he said calmly, my son may not have a pilot's license yet, but he just landed something many can't. The truth. Trask didn't respond, but the flush on his face said more than words. That evening, Elijah was invited to a private panel with aviation union leaders and FAA reform representatives. They discussed embedding the Flightline's archive into national training modules. They discussed expanding SEME into non-airline professions, security, air traffic control, and maintenance. Before leaving, a representative from the American Institute of Aviation Leaders turned to him and said, You're not just changing Horizon, Elijah. You're changing the map. Back home, Silas Green called him. I heard what you did, he said. You didn't flinch. I wanted to, Elijah admitted, but I remembered your words about flying even when you're tired. Silas chuckled. That's the secret. Every flight starts with uncertainty. The courage is in takeoff. It came in quietly. No press release, no announcement, just a revised internal memo circulated discreetly between department heads at Horizon Airlines under the subject line, Training Module Consolidation Proposal, Q4 Review, Buried in the fifth bullet point, written in corporate language so vague it nearly escaped notice, was the line, recommend phasing out third-party, non-certified programs from mandatory onboarding pathways, including SEMI initiative modules, to streamline compliance and minimize employee fatigue. Angela Kim stared at her screen, fingers frozen above her keyboard. Her office was quiet, but her heart raced. They were trying to kill it, not with confrontation, not like Captain Halberg, but with bureaucracy, a quiet erasure dressed as efficiency. No drama, no noise, just silence. She picked up her phone and called Elijah. Elijah sat in the back of his high school library when the call came in. The sun filtered through the windows, lighting the pages of his aviation engineering textbook. He had been reading about gyroscopic precession, but Angela's voice cut through all of it. They're moving to gut SEMI, she said bluntly. The Internal Strategy Committee met last week. No vote yet, but the language is there, and they're hiding it under training optimization. Elijah didn't speak for a moment. Then he closed his book. I need to see the memo. Angela hesitated. You're not technically on the compliance board. I don't care. I helped build this. They can't erase it like I was never there. Angela's silence was all the answer he needed. I'll be at HQ tomorrow. The Horizon Airlines headquarters looked the same as it had 3 months ago. Tall glass windows, perfectly arranged succulents in the lobby, and polished floors that reflected everything but accountability. Elijah stepped off the elevator onto the 19th floor and walked straight into the conference room where the memo had originated. Angela was waiting. So were 3 members of the training strategy team, all middle-aged, all polite, and all suddenly very quiet when Elijah entered. He dropped a copy of the SEMI curriculum onto the table. Beside it, he placed a printed version of the new memo, red lines underlining every attempt to downplay what they were doing. I'm here to ask one question, he said. Who signed off on this? There was a beat of awkward shifting. Then one of the executives, Mr. Halverson, VP of Operations, spoke. Elijah, no one's trying to remove your work. We're just trying to streamline training. There's only so much attention we can demand from our staff, especially when some feel that the SEMI modules are, redundant. Redundant? Elijah echoed. Did anyone read the feedback from the last 4 cohorts? The personal statements from pilots who said it made them see their colleagues differently? Halverson smiled tightly. That's anecdotal. What we're responding to are metrics. Elijah narrowed his gaze. Metrics don't cry when they're profiled. Metrics don't get humiliated in lounges. I am one of those anecdotes. And if your system can't hold my story, then the system's broken. Another executive, a woman named Diane from Human Integration, spoke up gently. Elijah, your work has been deeply meaningful, but some teams feel the tone of SEMI creates division, makes people feel accused before they've done anything wrong. Elijah inhaled slowly. And what about the ones who have done something wrong and were never held accountable? How many Captain Halbergs did your original trainings produce by staying polite and apolitical? No one answered. Angela finally spoke. What this proposal does is ensure that the next Elijah never makes it into the room, and that the next Halberg gets through orientation with no friction. Halverson folded his hands. We're not voting on this yet. Then let's bring it to a vote, Elijah said. Publicly. Excuse me? Diane asked. I want a town hall, open to every employee, every department. We put it all on the table, the memo, the module, the voices, and we let them decide. Halverson shifted uncomfortably. This is a corporate process. And this is a cultural reckoning, Elijah cut in. You brought SEMI in as PR when the cameras were rolling. Now that the noise has faded, you want to sweep it under the rug like it was a phase. But I'm not going to let you do that. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight, shaped by experience. I'm not 16 and scared anymore. I'm 16 and ready. The town hall happened 5 days later. It was packed. Pilots, maintenance staff, flight attendants, gate agents. More than 200 Horizon employees crowded into the company auditorium, some standing along the walls. Preston sat quietly near the back, watching. Silas Green, now a former consultant to the board, was present too, leaning on his cane, eyes narrowed in memory. Angela took the stage first. She laid out the memo. the language, the implications. Then Elijah stepped forward. He didn't use a slideshow. He didn't show a video. He simply read from the See Me reflections submitted by employees, pilots, cabin crew, janitors, who had completed the program in the past 3 months. I never realized how much I looked through people, not at them. I saw my younger self in Elijah's story, and I wept. See Me changed the way I lead. It didn't accuse me. It reminded me. I wish this existed 20 years ago. He looked up. This isn't a module, he said. It's a mirror. And if your instinct is to break the mirror instead of looking into it, maybe it's not the mirror that's the problem. Thunderous applause. The vote never happened, because it didn't need to. That night, Horizon's CEO issued a statement publicly reaffirming the See Me program. Not as optional, not as temporary, but as permanent curriculum for all new and continuing personnel, with advisory oversight led by intergenerational staff, including youth. Elijah's name was listed as the lead youth advisor, but more importantly, so was Silas Green as legacy advisor. Together, they stood side by side under the announcement banner, a young man and an elder, both carved by the wind of prejudice and sharpened by truth. 3 months had passed. 3 months since a quiet memo nearly erased a movement. 3 months since Elijah Monroe Walker stood in front of hundreds and refused to let silence bury the truth. And now on a crisp October morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the largest terminal in America, it all came full circle. The air buzzed with anticipation as press, airline employees, federal officials, and hundreds of invited guests filled the newly renovated Gate 17 of Horizon Airlines. But this was no ordinary gate. Above it, a sleek new banner had been unveiled that morning. Flight 501, one sky, one seat. Inspired by See Me, led by the future. Below the banner stood Elijah, no longer just a name whispered in news stories, but a figure of national reform, standing tall in a tailored blazer, his See Me pin shining against the lapel. To his right stood Captain Leah Morgan, in full uniform, hands clasped in front. To his left, Silas Green, with his cane and gentle eyes, looked decades younger in the presence of hope. And just behind him, with unmistakable quiet pride, was Preston Walker, father, protector, guide. The entire gate had been transformed into a ceremonial platform. News cameras lined the walls. A large video screen behind them played archived clips of See Me training sessions, testimonials, and Elijah's original live stream. The moment he stood on that lounge chair with a badge in one hand and the truth in the other. Now at 17, he stepped to the podium for the final time in this chapter of his story. He paused before speaking, letting the hush settle. I stood once in a room where I wasn't supposed to speak, Elijah began, where I wasn't supposed to be. That room almost erased me. But that same room is why we're here today. He looked around. And now we've built a bigger room. Applause. This initiative, Flight 501, One Sky, One Seat, is more than a campaign. It's a contract, a promise, that from this day forward, every passenger, every crew member, every child with a paper airplane dream will know there is a seat for them. He gestured toward the jet bridge behind him. Gate 17 has been rebuilt as Horizon's first See Me certified gate, where staff are fully trained in empathy-forward service, equipped with real-time response teams, and empowered to protect dignity as fiercely as safety. Another wave of applause. But that's just the beginning, he said. On screen behind him, the initiative's roadmap appeared. See Me will be implemented in 28 major airports by the next fiscal year. Pilot scholarships for underrepresented youth. Legacy archive partnerships with the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and a new virtual flight academy named in honor of Silas Green. When the applause finally faded, Elijah's voice softened. My journey started because I wanted to fly, not speak, not organize, just fly. But maybe flight was never just about altitude. Maybe it's also about perspective. He looked toward the children seated in the front row. Students from local middle schools, some wide-eyed, some scribbling notes. To the young ones here today, when they say you don't belong, don't fight to prove them wrong. Stand to prove yourself right. Because of the sky, it doesn't check names, It honors lift. The room went silent, not out of discomfort, but reverence. And then came a voice, warm, steady. "Permission to speak, Captain?" It was Silas. Elijah smiled. "Always." Silas stepped to the microphone, leaning slightly on his cane. His voice, worn by time but sharpened by purpose, rang clear. "I spent decades wondering if anyone would remember we were here, that we tried, that we endured. I thought maybe history would forget us. But today I stand next to the future, and I realize we were never meant to be remembered. We were meant to be followed." He turned to Elijah. "You followed, and now you lead." The applause rose slowly, rising like dawn breaking through. The ceremony ended with the unveiling of a sculpture next to Gate 17. Two bronze chairs, one high, sleek and modern, labeled the present, and one smaller, aged with rivet detail, labeled the past. Between them was an open space left empty with a plaque that read, "Reserved for the next," a permanent symbol that there is always another seat waiting, always another voice rising. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the tarmac and the final guests departed, Elijah stood alone by the window, watching planes lift into the sky. Captain Leah Morgan approached and stood beside him. "You know," she said, "when I started flying, they used to tell me I was an exception." Elijah turned to her. "What do they say now?" She smiled. "Now they say I was early." Back in the quiet hangar where they first met, Silas handed Elijah one final gift, a vintage pilot's logbook, the leather worn soft, the pages blank. "For your hours," he said, "you've earned the first 1,000 already, not in miles, in meaning." That night, Elijah returned home and opened a fresh page. He wrote, "First entry, date, October 18th. Location, Gate 17, Atlanta. Not airborne yet, but something bigger. Today the ground listened, and the sky opened a little wider." He closed the book, knowing this wasn't the end. It was just the first true flight. Epilogue moment. 1 month later, CME becomes a national aviation standard, adopted by 3 major airlines with FARA endorsement. Elijah begins co-leading the Flight for Dignity Youth Council, visiting cities across America. His story is taught in ethics classes. His name is etched on a commemorative plaque at the FARA's main training center. And Gate 17 becomes a place where people go, not just to fly, but to remember.